Okay, in this video we're going to cover some use of the Color Warper tool. Now there's a lot to this, so we're not going to cover all of it all at once. We're just going to cover the basic hue and saturation adjustments you can make with the Color Warper tool. So by default we may have our curves exposed. Over to the right there's another icon which is a hexagon with a load of dots in it. It looks like a spider's web. We're going to click that and reveal the Color Warper Hue Saturation tool, and we're going to stick with this one for now. Now I'll just reset it, make sure it's going to be what you see as well. So the Color Warper tool is a lot like having both the hue versus hue and hue versus saturation curves, secondary attribute curves, at the same time. It lets us change hue and saturation of pixels simultaneously, and it does that in a few ways of, let's say, varying levels of intuitiveness. It can be a bit difficult to get your head around this tool, but we're going to take a look at some basic use cases for it. So the first thing you'll notice is that it does look a lot like our vector scope on the right, but it's not the same, and that's because the Color Warper uses a variety of color spaces which we can switch between down here in the lower right, and none of them appear to be RGB. It will default to HSP, which I believe is Hue Saturation Perceived Brightness. We don't need to change this, and to be frank, the logic behind changing this gets very, very in-depth, and for these kinds of projects it's not going to be necessary information. It's just going to be needlessly complicated to cover that right now. What this means is that what you see on your vector scope in your Color Warper will look a bit different from what you see on your vector scope to the right if you have it exposed. This is normal and not something to be particularly concerned about. It's just the way that this tool works. It uses a different, the way in which it interprets color and maps color is a little bit different. So let's start looking at how we might actually use this tool. I have this grid of points here, and if I click on a point and I move it, you may see that some colors begin to change, and you may also see how the reading on my vector scope to the right changes in real time as I move this point around. And you may be able to guess what's happening here. We are essentially picking up a part of our reading on the vector scope, and we're moving it around by clicking and dragging these points. So the point which is close to or underneath this point gets moved depending on how I drag this point around, and by doing this I can rotate the hue and I can change the saturation in the same correction. I no longer need to use two separate tools to do this. Now you may be looking at this and thinking, well, it's a bit difficult to understand. Also, I've got these 6 points here. I can't seem to click and drag these lines. What's going on? So there are a few different ways in which we can use this tool, and one of the easiest ways is to make sure that we have the qualifier or the eyedropper active here on the lower left of the screen. We have a variety of tools which we'll come back to later, and if we click the eyedropper, we'll have an eyedropper on the screen. And what I can do is I can actually just click in the screen on the color I want to use, and then I can drag it, and you'll notice the direction in which I drag this eyedropper tool is then mirrored in the Color Warper diagram down below. And this is the easiest way for me to use it. It's the easiest and most intuitive way for me to use this tool. I can then make my blue saturation hue adjustment. I can make it a kind of a juicy saturated cyan very, very quickly and with only one tool. And that's really the strength of the Color Warper. It's actually an extremely powerful tool, even if it does take a little while to get your head around. Now, you may be looking at this and thinking, well, yeah, but what we want to use is down here, and this dot is well, above this, and this doesn't seem very accurate to me if we don't have very many points to work with, and that's a good observation. In the lower left of the Color Warper interface, we have these drop downs, and these allow us to choose essentially the resolution of the Color Warper interface, how many different points we have to work with, and the more points we use, the more accurate the Color Warper is going to be. However, we do need to be careful in that if we have too many points and start to create too many hard boundaries on here, we will start to make visible artifacts. Generally, the warper is pretty good at avoiding artifacts, but with a lot of points, it can start to create them. I typically like to work at 12, a resolution of 12, and you'll see that gives me points right over the secondary colours between all of our key targets as well, so it's a good resolution to work with. Now, you can see I've got much more accurate control. I'm not hitting the shirt anymore, and I've really got good control over that blue colour that I wanted to work with. So I now can just click and drag these things around, and that's a simple way to work with the colour warper. However, there are some little rules that you need to be aware of, and I'm going to go back to a resolution of 6 here. Make sure you have this chain link active when you're changing your resolution, because the horizontal and vertical resolution of this hexagon can be changed independently. You can have more spokes but fewer vertical points if you want. In actual fact, 12:6 is a pretty good way to work. Or you can make it the same. I like 12:12, you get a good degree of accuracy. However, for beginners, 12 on the first one and 6 on the second is probably the easiest way to learn to use this tool, in all fairness, so we'll stick with this for now. Now, there are some rules we need to be aware of here. You'll notice that most of these points are white, but the ones around the outside and the central point have a black border with a white core. This means that they are pinned or locked, and you'll notice if I click and I drag a white point directly in the interface, not every other point moves. So let's talk about how this logic works, what exactly is going on here. Any point with a black border, any pin, will not move when nearby points move as well. You'll see the center and the outside, they're not moving. And also, if we imagine this is a bicycle wheel, we have the vertical columns reaching from the center outwards, we'll call these spokes. If I drag a point, only the points on that same spoke will move. You'll see only on this line, going from the center to the outside, only the points on this line going outwards move. The adjacent ones do not move, and that is by design. That's to stop us from really messing everything up with a single adjustment. So, the black pins won't move if points nearby them do move, and only the points in the same spoke or column will move as well. And this makes the tool much easier to use. Once I have changed or moved a point, it then gains a black border and becomes a pin. So if I move a point and then move an adjacent point, you'll see it doesn't move. And I can start to get some really weird effects by introducing some very high hue contrast in similar values here. So once we've moved a point, it no longer moves if we move an adjacent point. We have to click on it and move it again. We can click on and move any pin, and they will move adjacent points. But once a point becomes a pin, moving anything nearby it, or moving anything next to it, won't cause it to move anymore. And this is just so that we don't end up immediately undoing any adjustment that we've just made. So it's quite a logical way to approach this. So this is the basic way of using the color warper. It's hue and saturation at the same time. We have a whole bevy of tools over here that become very complicated very quickly, and I'm really not going to go into that much detail right now because it's just too much for this early on in the course. It really, really is. So there are a few more tips and tricks for making very basic use of the color warper, which we'll just quickly look at. We know that we can click on the picture and see, but what I can also do is I can hold Alt and I can click a point on the chart. And if I'm holding Alt, whilst I hold down the left click, it shows me which pixels will be affected if I move this target, or if I move this point, I should say. So doing this, I can quite easily figure out which of these, if I just hold Alt and click, and if I don't move it, it won't turn into a pin, so that's fine. Which of these tools, or which of these points, best isolate the hues I want to work with. So let's say I want to work with the skin. Well, it would be these two here, because the skin at the moment is a little bit on the yellow side. So now if I want to make an adjustment to the skin, I just hold Alt and click to say, okay, this will show me the skin, and now I'll just go, and I'll push the skin upwards, and I'm going to put my eye line back on again. Maybe put my graticule visibility up. And I'll just nudge things a little bit closer to the eyeline skin tone, and now you can see on the same node I've made my hue saturation adjustment to the skin with one tool. Didn't need to use two curves, did not need to use a HSL keyer, which we'll obviously be using later on. So this can be a very, very powerful tool, and at a kind of resolution of 12, the fall off is naturally very good. It generally tends to avoid artifacting and visible problems. That is, unless we start to go crazy and we start to, drag the points beyond each other. And that's possible and perfectly valid in some cases to make an adjustment like this, but only if we're doing very strong stylized stuff, and obviously never to skin tones. If I wanted to make the background green, for example, I could make an adjustment like this, and you'll see that the fall off on that, there's no real artifacting visible. It's fairly good, and if we watch it in motion, there's a little bit of a blue halo around the edge here and the arm, so we just want to watch out for that, I guess. But it is generally pretty powerful. So we want to keep it simple with this tool for now. This really is as much as I want to cover, because it goes very, very deep, and it can get to be very, very advanced, which I don't want to do right now in the course. So have a play around with this. Use it to make the same basic adjustments you were doing beforehand. Use it to make hue and saturation adjustments to the skin. Use it to make hue and saturation adjustments to the background, to foliage, and what have you. And just get a feel for it and get your eye in. And once you've done that, click on through to the next lecture once you're ready.